mean, it's obviously tough right now. You battle all season, and at the end of the day, it's we're trying to develop, but you also want to win and you want to get to playoffs, and that's not something that's happened. So, as I said to the players, all you can do is move on and try and grow from it individually, and try and get better as coaches, better as players, and whether you're back in Hershey next year or playing for some other organization, you try and learn from it as best you can. So obviously there's a lot of things that went wrong this year, or we wouldn't be talking about not playing here next week, which is difficult. Personally for me, it's 11 years since I haven't coached in the first round of a playoff. So that's tough to swallow, and it's not a great feeling. So hopefully it won't happen again.
And when you look at the development, 20-goal season from Wilkes-Barre, Travis Boyd right now is in Washington. Vince Copley right now is an extra goaltender in Washington. So when you take a step back overall, is it a satisfaction when you look at some of your prospects that you've been inherited here and gathered along the way?
Well, I think that if you look at the development side of things, I certainly believe that the job has been done. And I think next to Boston, I think Boston and Washington have the most rookies on the NHL roster. We had 4 guys from last year's club that played 50-plus games, and I think that's the first time that's happened since, I don't have the dates, but it's probably 82, 83 for the Washington Capitals. So that's positive. I think Travis Boyd is on the cusp of being an NHL player. So there's 5 right there. And, there's obviously a couple more here. We had Walker make his debut this year, which was awesome to see back in October. And so there's a lot of positive in that. And, we got some youth on the back end. And I'm sure there's a couple of those guys that in due time will see their moment in Washington. So I think from that side of things, obviously, I think things have gone tremendously well, and we've done a good job there. And but unfortunately, we're not in the playoffs, and when you're coaching and playing in Hershey, that's also part of it. And that just unfortunately hasn't happened for us this year. So we just got to regroup here and get back to it next year.
With an average NHL team spots for 7 defensemen on the roster, when you look at the prospects in the organization, it's very blue line heavy. So talk about how far along you see your young blue liners come this season, and where you would like to see them improve their game going into next year if they want to go to training camp and try to make the roster.
Well, I think it's safe to say that defense is the hardest position to, and usually there's a little bit of a longer process in terms of the development from the defenseman's perspective. But I think that when you look at Siegenthaler and Johansson, there's the first 2 off the top of my head. I think they've improved. They've gotten better since the start, and that's all you can ask for. There's certainly some inconsistencies, and sometimes it's week to week, sometimes it's game to game, but that's natural. But I think if you brought each of those defensemen in here and asked them, did you improve this year? And I suspect the answer would be a resounding yes. Unfortunately, a guy like Connor Hobbs missed half the season, so he missed some injury time. So he's, wouldn't say his development is stalled, but it's certainly a little bit behind the other guys because he missed so much time. And, let's not forget about Lewington and Williams, who are a little bit under the radar, but they're both still very young and still very capable of getting better. And, obviously, if you look at that next year, the defense core will be very, very similar to what you've seen this year because there's only so many spots in Washington. So, all that youth is not going to graduate come October. So I suspect that the defense core will look very, very similar to what you've seen this year, which should be good because that means they will be a little bit more mature and should be better. Obviously up front, it's a little bit different right now. And that's the area that, I'm assuming that will be addressed. But, I'm just a coach, so there's not really much I can say on that at this stage.
When look at this game now, it's 12 times facing Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, not able to put them away in regulation in any of those games when it's up against them and really want to value. Ultimately, simply, what do you think is it that they have that we just don't?
Well, that's a good question. Our record between Lehigh and Wilkes-Barre is 4 wins, 17 losses, 2 overtime losses, and a shootout. So that's 24 hockey games. So you cannot go 4-17, 2-1 against Lehigh Valley and Wilkes-Barre and expect to make playoffs. So there's one reason right there that why we're not playing next week. And they are two of the best teams in the league. So unfortunately, for whether they got our number, and we can talk about whys, but that is right there. I mean, we're 9-4-1 against the North. We're 15-3 and something against the rest of the league. So that's above 500 hockey. 7 or 8 games, 9 games above 500. So certainly that is, if I was to give you 10 reasons why we are not playing next weekend, certainly the record against Lehigh and Wilkes-Barre is at the top of the list.
There's a school of thought that sometimes you want to just move on from a season like this and put it away as fast as possible. Or do you want to let it burn a little bit for your players and let that bad feeling sit there for a bit? That's motivation.
Well, I think that, there's such a great turnover in the American League. I think it's greater than 50%, usually your roster turnover. Now, last year we were a little bit fortunate. I think we brought 18 or 17 players back from the Calder Cup run. So last year was a little bit different, but we had a tremendous amount of turnover this year, and I suspect it'll be, even the same next year. So that's difficult because, a lot of the guys won't be back, but let's face it, the majority of our defensemen, like I said, everybody can't make Washington. So hopefully when it comes to those guys, they reflect over the summer as well and get bigger and stronger and go into Washington trying to make that team. And then if they don't, come back here and realize that we have to get into the playoffs next April. So that would be the motivation in terms of the number of players or the core of the team. And there's a really good core here of 7-8 guys that will be back next year just because of their contract status.
Just in your experience, when a young team misses the playoffs, what do those players miss out on?
Well, I just think it's the best time of the year. I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for the philosophy of every other organization, but I think you cannot put a premium on trying to win and learning how to win in playoffs. And, I watched the Columbus-Washington game the other night, and, there's 5-6 guys on both rosters from that Calder Cup final from 2 years ago with Cleveland. You can't tell me that those guys winning and us getting to the finals does not help them in their NHL careers. So that's just one example, and I think it was mentioned in the broadcast the other night about the number of players on both sides that faced each other two springs ago. So I think it's vital to the development of the player, and it certainly stings from our end not to be there this year.
As long as, in the foreseeable future, Lehigh and Wilkes are going to be in this division. So how do you raise that bar to get up to their level again and, reach traditionally Hershey winning tradition?
Yeah, I mean, I think that everybody's got to sit back and reflect a little bit in the off season and take a deep breath, and then just everybody get their heads together in terms of what do we need to do, because Lehigh's they've had a lot of prospects come in the last 2-3 years. I remember when I came back to Hershey as the head coach, I believe Lehigh finished in last place in the division, but they've been a powerhouse here the last couple of years, and Wilkes-Barre's always a strong contender. So and when you've got 24 games against those two teams, that's a huge amount of hockey. So it's one of those things you just got to sit back and dissect it and see, okay, why do we only have 4 wins against those two teams? Because that's a big chunk, and you've got to be 500 or better against those two clubs, and I think then you give yourself at least a fighting chance to get in the playoffs.
How much of this do you see as a victim of circumstances being in this division, or knowing that there is a lot of room for improvement?
Well, I think that you don't go 4-17, 2-1 against two teams and say it's all bad luck. So certainly as a coaching staff, we'll sit down and discuss it, and if anybody asks us certain the whys, we'll certainly give our opinion. But it's something that we got to do for be better at going forward. And it is the toughest division, in my opinion, and it has been for years. With the amount of Providence doesn't go away either. They've got a good mix of youth and veteran presence there as well. And Charlotte was a formidable opponent that surprised me as well, and maybe a lot because we didn't see them. They were either in their conference, but they've got a set of forwards that could be the best I've seen at this level this year. So it's a tough goal, and we just gotta be better next year and be back.
Not personnel-wise, but just identity-wise. What identity do you want to have this team next year?
Well, I think I'd like to get back to being a top scoring team. And that goes with skill, and every summer is different recruiting wise for upper management, and it also differs because of who's coming in from a prospects perspective. And but I know that Lehigh finished first in goals for this year, Charlotte finished second, Wilkes-Barre finished fourth. And the last 2 years we were in the top 5 in scoring. So that's something that's just going to happen. Every year that it seems like 3 or 4 teams in our division are in the top 5 in scoring, and Province was second in goals again. So that's why they were able to get that shift on, and their goals for was the middle of pack. So that allowed them to be in the top 4 with 3 pretty high scoring teams. But it just depends on who's graduating to the pro ranks. And you look at 2 years ago we had the Veranas and the Boyds and the Barbers, and those type of players are coming in, and you mix in the Galievs and the Paul Carey, who turned into a great scorer for us, and geez, that's a tremendous amount of offense. So just a little bit different this year, and next year with some youthful guys coming in, graduating from junior, and you get a couple top-notch scorers, and you're right back at it. So it's it certainly can be done.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.